There are few positions in the Imperium of man more coveted and more cursed than that of a planetary governor. To the unknowing, the title sounds divine. A ruler of billions, chosen by the High Lords, commanding fleets, armies, and entire continents in the name of the Emperor. But beneath the golden sigil of the Aquila lies a truth so harrowing it corrodes the soul. A governor's palace might gleam with marble and gold, but its corridors echo with whispers of betrayal, the stench of rot, and the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears. Every decision, every tax decree, every military order, every public execution is a prayer screamed into the void, begging that Terra does not notice them. For to be noticed in the Imperium is to invite judgment, and judgment comes with fire. Even in their highest towers, surrounded by servitors and guardsmen, they live under the shadow of extermination, one misstep away from being declared heretic, incompetent, or expendable. In the endless bureaucracy of the Imperium, power is not a gift. It is a death sentence written in gold. Before we descend deeper into this grim hierarchy of fear and duty, make sure you've joined this channel's growing archive of imperial truth. Like, subscribe, and share this chronicle, not for glory, but so others might understand what truly lies beneath the Emperor's shining light. The more who know, the more we remember the price of survival in this endless night. The incense coils through the air like dying prayers, each wisp curling toward the vaulted ceiling and fading into the shadows where the light dares not go. I sit before the desk, marble, cracked, veins of black running through white, and wonder how many governors before me sat in this same posture of quiet defeat. The vox chimes toll again, the sound brittle, mechanical, unfeeling. Each tone marks another decree signed, another life condemned to fulfill quotas no mortal hand can meet. The parchment smells of oil and wax. My fingers are stained with ink and fear. Even the ink seems to bleed slower now, reluctant, as if aware of the futility of these words. The servitors hum softly behind me, a chorus of low mechanical lamentations. Their augmetic eyes flicker, casting cold halos across the floor. They do not tire, do not question, do not dream. I envy them. One, its torso bound in rusted ceramite, turns its head as if to watch me and for a heartbeat. I imagine there is pity in its hollow gaze. Then its head snaps back to its task, the illusion broken. In their mechanical rhythm, I hear something that mocks me: precision, order, obedience. All the things that crumble under the weight of human doubt. Outside the sanctum's armored shutters, I can hear the distant pulse of unrest. The manufactoria never sleep, but their rhythm has changed. It is no longer the cadence of labor, but of uprising. The reports from the lower habs speak of burned tithe stations, of preachers torn apart in the streets, of the faithful losing faith. They are hungry, afraid, and angry. And I, their supposed planetary shepherd, can offer them only words and ashes. Each communique from the Adeptus Administratum carries that same frigid tone: correct the deviation, enforce compliance. They speak as though the will of the Emperor were a matter of paperwork and signatures, as though I could bind chaos with ink. My eyes drift toward the great carving of the imperial Aquila above the sanctum's archway. Once I found strength in its twin-headed gaze, its eternal vigilance. Now I see only a symbol of impossible expectation. One head looks to Terra, the other to the stars, but neither sees the dying worlds between. My planet, Varelia Secundus, is one such world, forgotten amid the endless gears of the Imperium's machine. Dust storms scour the plains. Manufactoria belch promethium fumes into the sky. And every morning the sun rises weaker than before. Even the light feels tired here. A thought lingers where it shouldn't. Heretical, perhaps, but persistent. Does the Emperor know we exist? Or are we simply a flicker within his infinite vision, one more world to burn in his name and then be swept aside? They say his light guides the ships through the warp, that the Astronomicon shines eternal because he wills it so. But down here, beneath this dying sky, the Astronomicon feels like a rumor told to children to keep them from screaming. The vox chime sounds again, sharper this time, cutting through my thoughts. Another transmission from orbit, sealed by the sigil of the Administratum. The servitor glides forward, clanking on metal legs, its rebreather hissing as it sets the data slate upon my desk. The seal bears the symbol of the Inquisition, a stylized eye ringed in crimson. I hesitate before breaking it, fingers trembling despite myself. The wax cracks like bone beneath my thumb. The message within is short. Too short. A single word etched in cold binary text. Audit, the silence that follows, is absolute. Even the servitors seem to still, as though some unseen force has entered the room. I stare at that word, feeling its weight settle into my chest. Audit. The term is clinical, bureaucratic, but every governor in the segmentum knows what it truly means. It is not an inspection. It is a reckoning. Somewhere in the deep corridors of the palace, a siren wails once before cutting out, as though strangled mid. The faint tremor that follows could be distant thunder, or the landing of an inbound vessel. My mind races through the possibilities. A delegation from the Administratum, perhaps. Or worse, the black-robed agents of the Inquisition themselves. I rise slowly, the chair scraping against the marble like a blade across stone. The incense has burned low, its smoke thickening into a haze that blurs the aquila above me. Through that haze, the golden rays of morning begin to pierce. Diffused through the smog outside the light of the Astronomicon, distant and cold, reaching even here. It feels less like a blessing and more like judgment. Somewhere beyond the walls, the riots swell again, muffled roars that seem to echo the unrest within my own heart. I know that by nightfall, something will change. The word audit has already rewritten the air around me. It means that someone is watching now, someone from beyond this world, beyond my reach, beyond mercy. I walk to the window, resting my palm against the cold steel. The smog beyond is tinged red by the rising sun. The first transports of the day lift from the Manufactoria, trailing black plumes that stretch toward the heavens, toward Terra itself. For the first time in years, I whisper a prayer, not for deliverance, for remembrance, that when judgment comes, the Emperor might at least remember that Veralius Secundus once tried to be loyal, and in the distance, a thunderclap rolls through the smog, deep and resonant, the sound of engines descending from orbit. The underhive never sleeps. It hums like a wounded beast, metal lungs rasping beneath a crust of soot and rust. The air here tastes of promethium and iron, every breath thick enough to chew. Somewhere above, the governor's marble sanctum gleams beneath filtered light, but down here, light is a trespasser. It fights the dark and loses. I've spent 20 years in these tunnels, keeping the Manufactoria alive, keeping the workers in line. My name doesn't matter anymore. Names have a way of vanishing in the underhive. Down here, I am only what the vox grills call me, overseer. The shifts have grown longer, the rations smaller. Men and women collapse at their stations, their bodies carted off by servitors that smell of old oil and sanctified decay. I used to file reports about it, stamped and sealed with my oath to the emperor. Now, those reports vanish into silence. Sometimes, I imagine them piling up somewhere on a desk of marble and gilt. They say the governor still rules from above, that his word is law, but no word has reached us in months. All we hear are echoes, orders distorted by distance, by corruption, by fear. The hum of the assembly lines stops suddenly, a sound so rare it freezes every heart. I step from my post and peer into the main corridor. Red warning lumen flicker overhead, painting the world in pulses of blood. Through the haze, I see them, 6 of them, their armor gleaming wetly under the light, augmetics clicking like the tick of a metronome. The vox chant of binary code ripples from their speakers as they move, mechanical prayers to the omniscient. To the workers, their presence is not salvation. It is judgment. They're here again, searching, always searching. Rumors say a heretic cult has taken root in the sublayers, rerouting power from the manufactoria to hidden shrines. The skittery call it blasphemy. The workers call it survival. I call it inevitability. When the machine gods fail to feed their flock, the flock finds new gods. The soldiers pass within arm's reach, their eyes hidden behind red lenses that reflect the trembling faces of those they inspect. One stops before me. His auspex scans my data slate, beeping in approval. For a moment, I see my reflection in his visor, pale, exhausted, human. Then he turns away, and I am invisible again. The workers whisper once they're gone, words that travel faster than the ration drones. They speak of missing families, whole shifts erased from the registers. Some say the skittery take them for questioning. Others say the enforcers drag them into the ducts and sell their bodies for machine parts. But lately, new rumors stir of a ship that has come from Terra itself, carrying men dressed in black and silence. The word audit burns through the hive like fever. None of us know what it truly means, only that it brings death to those who cannot account for their loyalty. I walk the tunnels to clear my thoughts. The walls here are damp, covered in grime and faded murals of the Imperial Aquila. Someone has drawn a blindfold over one of the eagle's eyes, the paint still wet. A blasphemy, yes, but also a truth too dangerous to speak. The Emperor sees all, they tell us. But down here, I wonder if he chooses not to look. Every prayer I've uttered feels thinner than the air I breathe. Every amen feels like an apology. The deeper I go, the more the hive breathes differently, slower, heavier. The pipes drip condensation that tastes faintly of oil. In the distance, a machine bell tolls, marking the change of shift. The sound rolls through the tunnels like thunder, but no one moves. Fear has frozen them all. The skittery have found something. I hear it in the shift of their machine chant, in the rising frequency of their vox transmissions. By the time I return to the main manufactorum, the air is choked with smoke. A section of the floor has been sealed off, guarded by 2 enforcers wearing rebreathers that hiss with every breath. Through the cracks of the barrier, I glimpse shapes, bodies, maybe, or what's left of them. One enforcer tells me the heretics were found beneath the coolant ducts, their flesh grafted with machine parts. They turned themselves into gods, he says, voice distorted through his mask. And the skittery turned them back into men. That night, the fires burn hotter. Not just the furnaces, the riots. The workers can smell the weakness above, the cracks spreading from the governor's palace down into their bones. I climb to the highest gantry, watching the chaos unfold below. Flames lick the walls, black smoke curling toward the heavens. And far above, through the haze and ash, I can almost see the governor's tower, a distant spire of marble and gold. He's watching, I know it, perhaps even praying. But if he believes his throne holds power, he is wrong. Power lives down here, where the blood runs thickest, where faith rots and rebellion takes root. As the first screams echo, through the ducts and the skittery raise their weapons once more, I realize that this world is already being judged, not by Terra, not by the Emperor, but by its own forgotten people, and somewhere deep within the hive, something stirs, older, colder, and far less human. The air in the palace tastes of polish and fear. The servants scrub the marble until their fingers bleed, polishing the same golden aquila that once glowed with faith but now gleams only with dread. The banners of Terra are unfurled again, their crimson threads trembling in the stagnant air. Every corridor smells of incense thick enough to choke a man, an offering of devotion meant to hide the stench of panic. They tell us to prepare for the delegation, that the Emperor's own emissaries are coming. But beneath the ceremony, everyone understands the truth. They are not envoys. They are auditors. When their ship pierces the clouds, the sky itself seems to flinch. The Vox Towers report its descent in ritual tones, every syllable like the tolling of a funeral bell. I stand at the grand balcony as the craft settles on the landing platform, its hull marked with the sigil of the Inquisition, a black eye surrounded by gilded purity seals that flutter like dying wings. The engines hiss as they cool, exhaling smoke that drifts through the air like the breath of a burning god. The first figure to emerge is cloaked in midnight robes, the red of his rosette pulsing faintly in the dim light. Behind him march others, scribes, adepts, and a single silent custodian, his armor gleaming like the judgment of heaven itself. I lower myself to one knee, not from loyalty, from instinct. The presence of such power is unbearable, as though the air itself bends to accommodate it. The Inquisitor's footsteps echo down the hall like the slow rhythm of an execution drum. When he finally speaks, his voice is smooth and cold, like oil poured over glass. "Governor Martron hail," he says, my name pronounced with surgical precision. "Your service to the Imperium has been noted." It sounds like praise, but feels like a sentence. I rise at his command. Around us, the court watches nobles and priests, each wrapped in practiced reverence. Yet no one meets the Inquisitor's gaze. He asks questions about production, about quotas, about faith. Every query is wrapped in courtesy, every word sharpened to a blade's edge. When he smiles, I can see no warmth behind it, only calculation. The tithes from Veralia Secundus have faltered, he observes, glancing down at a data slate held by his attendant. 3% deviation from the segmentum standard. Explain this. 3%. Such a small number, such a deadly one. I speak of worker unrest, of supply shortages, of the manufacturer's failing machine spirits. He listens in silence. Then, softly, is the Emperor's will hindered by circumstance? The question is not meant to be answered. I bow my head, murmuring the only response possible. "No, my lord, never." He nods. "Then you will correct it." His delegation walks the palace halls like priests in a cathedral of sin, their every glance stripping away layers of pretense. They praise the loyalty of my guards, commend the cleanliness of the shrine, and bless the banners hung in devotion. Yet each word feels like another weight added to my chest. Their scribes make notes of everything: the rust on a reliquary, the flicker in a lumen strip, the hesitation in a servant's bow. Even silence becomes evidence. When night finally comes, the palace feels hollow. The lights dim to a cold blue glow. I retreat to the private chapel, its air heavy with dust and forgotten prayers. The statue of the emperor towers above the altar, its face cracked by time. I kneel, hands trembling against the stone floor. For years I have prayed for strength to rule, to endure, to serve. Tonight I pray for forgiveness. For the workers I condemned to the manufactoria, for the soldiers sent to quell riots with less fire and faith, for the children who will starve to fill quotas carved in marble far beyond this world. The candles flicker. Somewhere behind me, something stirs. A faint hum, soft and deliberate. I turn my head and see it. A server skull drifting from the shadows, its optics glowing faintly red. The polished bone of its visage catches the candlelight as it hovers closer. It records in silence, its vox receiver ticking faintly. It's been watching, listening, perhaps for hours. My voice falters. I stare into its hollow eyes and realize there is no prayer private enough to escape the audit. I whisper anyway. Words meant only for him. Words I no longer believe he hears. When I finish, the servo skull emits a quiet chirp, like acknowledgement or accusation, and glides back into the dark. Outside, the night air is heavy with the scent of burned incense and promethium. Somewhere in the distance, a thunderclap rolls across the hive, the echo of the delegation's shuttle engines preparing for departure. Or perhaps the sound of something beginning. A faint whisper runs through the vox channels. Carried on static and fear, the audit has begun. Asterisk. The council chamber hums like a dying machine spirit, all polished brass and perfumed decay. It is a place that pretends to be holy, but smells only of dust and fear. The walls are carved with the sigils of the administratum, each line an ancient oath written in languages no living scribe remembers. Candles burn in precise geometric patterns across the room, their smoke mixing with the tang of machine oil. I sit upon the dais, flanked by robed adepts who murmur in low mechanical tones, reciting production metrics as if they were litanies. Every word, every number, every syllable is offered like incense to a god who no longer listens. The vox grill before me crackles. It's static, almost comforting. It is my tether to command, though I often wonder who truly commands whom. My words must travel through so many filters. The lex mechanics, the compliance auditors, the data depths, that by the time they reach the manufactoria, they are no longer my words at all. Orders are issued in my name, but their meaning belongs to the machine. My authority has become ritual, stripped of intent, gilded with procedure. Governor Hale drones, one of the senior adepts. His voice filtered through a rebreather grill that turns every breath into a hiss. The tithe projections from Manufacturum Delta 4 indicate a 12% deficiency in promethium reserves. He presents a data slate, its screen pulsing weakly. The discrepancy has been logged with the segmentum office, 12%. I do not ask what that means for the workers. I already know. 12% means longer shifts, fewer rations, more bodies in the incinerators. It means more prayers to a God who demands silence in return. I sign the slate without speaking. The quill servitor beside me chirps in binary acknowledgement, sealing my approval with wax and blood. Another edict obeyed. Another piece of myself surrendered. Around the chamber, the adepts continue their droning. They speak of shipments, delays, loss reports, a symphony of control disguised as devotion. Their parchment robes whisper as they move, covered in stamped sigils and purity seals. They call themselves the hands of the Emperor, but I see them for what they are, the nervous system of obedience. They do not serve faith. They serve the process. A flicker of static interrupts the ritual. The vox grill flares with light. A voice, sharp and metallic, cuts through the hum. Encrypted transmission, origin uncertain. Priority red. The adepts fall silent. The servitors freeze mid-motion, their logic engines awaiting permission to breathe again. I nod, and the voice continues, distorted by distance and fear. Production irregularities detected in southern manufacturums. Possible sabotage. Investigation recommended. The words hang in the air like smoke. Sabotage. It is a word few dare to speak aloud, especially here where obedience is worship. The adepts exchange glances, their mechanical eyes flickering with calculation. One mutters a prayer to the Omnissiah. Another begins recording data sigils in the air. None of them look at me. Not yet. I rise from my chair, the sound echoing through the vaulted chamber. Seal the report, I command. My voice feels strange, too human among so much machinery. Route all findings to the inquisitorial delegation. The adepts bow, their movements slow, ritualistic. The sound of servitor quills resumes, scratching across parchment like rats beneath the floor. But the words echo in my skull. Production irregularities. The Underhive riots had been suppressed weeks ago, yet the fires never fully died. The manufactoria have grown restless, and now the machine spirits falter. I have seen what happens when a planet begins to doubt its purpose. The bureaucracy does not mend doubt. It consumes it, feeds on it, until there is nothing left but compliance. The meeting dissolves in silence, replaced by the hollow rhythm of ritual seals, pressed, scripts chanted, orders duplicated and archived. The adepts recite closing hymns to the Emperor's ineffable will, their voices monotone and unwavering. I stand alone at the dais, watching as they file out one by one, their footfalls echoing down the marble corridors. When the last of them is gone, I approach the central vox reel. The machine hums faintly, its surface warm beneath my palm. For a moment, I think I hear breathing within the static, soft, deliberate, almost human. Perhaps it is just the interference, or perhaps it is the sound of something alive within the system, listening, waiting. The candles burn low. The incense has turned acrid, biting the back of my throat. I reach for another data slate and hesitate before activating it. Somewhere beneath the endless layers of protocol and devotion, beneath the chants and seals, something in me trembles. The machinery of obedience is vast, eternal, unbroken, but tonight, I feel its gears grind against bone, and through the static, faint but unmistakable, the encrypted channel repeats the same phrase once more. Production. Irregularities detected. The air inside the manufactorum tastes of metal and despair. Every breath carries the Thames of rust and burnt oil, searing the lungs like a punishment disguised as necessity. The governor moves through the shadowed catwalks, escorted by a pair of silent skittery, whose red optics glow through the haze. Below him stretches a world of labor, Endless ranks of workers bent over conveyor lines, faces masked, fingers trembling as they feed raw ore into the forges. Sparks burst like dying stars, and each clang of hammer on steel rings like a tolling bell for the soul of mankind. The governor watches the rhythm of obedience, the way hundreds of bodies sway in unison, synchronized by fear, not faith. It is almost beautiful, this choreography of suffering, almost sacred, yet beneath the precision something falters, a flicker, a skipped movement, barely perceptible but impossible to ignore. The tech priest overseeing the sector approaches, robes stained with lubricants and ash. Cables slither from his spine, connecting him to a portable data shrine that hums with binary devotion. His vox voice crackles through static as he reports production delays. Minor, he insists, statistically negligible. The governor says nothing. His gaze drifts toward the lower platforms where workers move slower than regulation dictates. A server skull hovers near, recording. He can almost feel the tremor in the air, the shared dread that precedes punishment. The priest, perhaps sensing the governor's disquiet, begins reciting the canticles of maintenance, words meant to reassure. But they sound more like apologies whispered to indifferent gods, and then, through the mechanical noise, comes something fragile, human, a voice, barely audible, buried under the grinding of gears. The Emperor does not hear us. The words are almost lost, a ghost of rebellion that seems to vanish as soon as it's spoken. Yet the governor hears it, or believes he does. The skittery tense, scanning for the source, their augmetic limbs twitching like predators scenting blood. The tech priest halts mid. Silence ripples outward, thin and dangerous. The machines do not stop, but their rhythm stumbles, as if the very gears recoil from blasphemy. The governor's first instinct is denial. It must have been a distortion, interference in the vox relay, or a trick of the acoustics. But then he sees the workers, eyes lowered, movements stiff, a shared stillness that feels too deliberate. The tech priest orders a purge of the audio feed, citing corruption in the signal, but his mechadendrites tremble as they work. The governor knows that fear, it is not the fear of heresy itself, but of recognition, the fear that the machinery of faith might be grinding itself apart. Hours later, he stands in his private transit lift, ascending from the manufacturing depths. The smell of promethium clings to his cloak, an invisible mark of contamination. Through the lift's grated walls, he glimpses the massive statues of the Omnissiah and the Emperor standing side by side, one carved in steel, the other in stone, both cold, both blind. The workers below continue their endless toil, their chants mechanical, their gestures precise. But something in the sound has changed. It is no longer the clean rhythm of duty. It has texture now, a weight, a hesitation, a pulse of resentment that spreads like a low infection through the air as he reaches the upper levels. The governor hears the distant blare of an alarm. Routine, perhaps, or not. The vox grill on his wrist crackles with encrypted murmurs, reports of missing shipments, discrepancies in labor counts, whispers of unrest too organized to be coincidence. He looks once more through the steel mesh to the glowing abyss below, and for the first time he sees it not as a machine of order, but as a beast, endless, hungry, devouring its own flesh to keep the illusion of motion alive. He closes his eyes and breathes in the hot, metallic air. Somewhere down there, among the millions of voices that have forgotten how to speak, one dared to remember. One dared to say what others only think, The Emperor does not hear us. The phrase burns through his mind like forbidden scripture, echoing with terrifying clarity. Above, the lift halts with a shudder. A skittery awaits. Vox clicking a report the governor cannot yet bear to hear. Somewhere deep in the manufactorum below, another machine stalls. Another gear breaks. The great rhythm falters again, and this time it does not recover. The governor's chamber feels smaller now, not in size, but in weight. Every lumen glow hums louder than it should. Every page turned carries the faint echo of accusation. The reports have multiplied overnight, each stamped with crimson ink and marked with the sigil of the Ordo Hereticus. He can smell the parchment, oily, hot, faintly metallic, as though it remembers the blood it cost to be made. The words are mechanical, stripped of humanity, yet heavy with consequence. Interrogations complete. Confessions secured. Morale stabilized. Stabilized. Such a clean word for what he knows it means. He can see it between the lines. Men broken on iron benches. Screams filtered into data logs. Families erased from the census as easily as errors in calculation. The commissars arrived at dawn, their transports cutting through the smoke like black knives. They came without ceremony, without warning, figures of polished authority and righteous cruelty. Through the thick glass of his tower, the governor watched them descend into the manufactorums below, their capes trailing like wings of vultures. He tried to imagine their thoughts as they walked among the workers. Did they feel disgust, pity, or simply nothing at all? In the Imperium, the difference between faith and fear is measured only by the tone of an order. By midday, the first executions began. Not public, never public, not here. The Adeptus Mechanicus prefers silence over spectacle. Bodies vanish into furnaces, and ashes are labeled waste output. Yet whispers rise faster than the smoke, carrying rumors of disloyalty, corruption, even witchcraft. Each accusation fuels another purge, and the machine feeds itself, as it always does. The governor signs the approval edicts one after another, his hand steady though his stomach churns. Every document bears the imperial aquila, the sacred emblem of obedience, and yet, to him, it has begun to resemble shackles. At night, he walks alone through the upper corridors of the palace, the marble floors reflecting the flicker of the lumen orbs above. His reflection trails beside him, older, hollow-eyed, his regalia heavy with symbols he no longer feels worthy to wear. Through the arched window he can see the manufactorum sprawl, a horizon of smoke and flame, the veins of industry pulsing red in the dark. The city below is alive, but joyless, a vast heart that beats only to survive. He wonders if any of them, down there, still believe. If they pray, if they curse him by name. In the silence of his office, the governor dares to let his thoughts stray. Dangerous thoughts, thoughts that would condemn him if spoken aloud. What if the emperor truly cannot hear? What if obedience has become its own false god? His mind recoils from the blasphemy, but the question clings like ash. He looks to the great mural behind his desk, the emperor triumphant haloed in light, humanity kneeling at his feet. But the paint is cracking now, and in the fissures he sees something like decay. Then the voxgrill awakens, a hiss of static. First, sharp and cold, followed by a tone that signals priority transmission. The emblem that flickers onto the holoscreen freezes his blood. A stylized eye wreathed in purity seals, the mark of the Inquisition. The voice that follows is measured, almost polite. Planetary Governor Lucian Valen, it says, your compliance record is under review. The audit extends beyond production irregularities. All governance systems, administrative conduct, and faith adherence will be examined. For a long moment, Valen cannot move. His eyes drift toward the seal of compliance resting on his desk. A small, simple stamp of black iron engraved with the aquila. The same tool he's used to condemn hundreds, perhaps thousands, with the illusion of order. His fingers brush against it, and he feels the chill of the metal. Somewhere deep inside him, something cracks, not loudly, but cleanly, like glass under strain. He knows what must be done. He knows what is expected. He presses the seal into the ink. The sound it makes as it strikes the parchment is sharp and final, like the discharge of a bolt pistol, or the snap of a closing cell door. The document now bears his signature, his submission, his silence. The machine will continue to turn. It always does. But as the echo fades, he wonders for the first time if the cost of survival is simply too high, if obedience has become indistinguishable from death. Outside, thunder rolls through the smog, distant but growing. Somewhere below, a factory bell tolls without reason, and the workers hesitate mid-motion. The rhythm falters again, and in that tiny pause, the world seems to hold its breath. The sky above the city was the color of rusted blood, a permanent twilight born from centuries of burning faith. Smoke hung so thick that even the sun seemed afraid to pierce it. Below, the streets churned with movement. The armored boots of the Adeptus Arbites striking the ferrocrete in a rhythm that no longer sounded like order, but like mourning. Loudspeakers, mounted to the spires, blared hymns to the emperor. But the sound was warped, the words stretched thin, crackling through vox distortion, more like screams than prayers. Every few seconds, a different voice took over, some preaching penance, others warning of heresy, all demanding obedience. It was impossible to tell which were sermons and which were death sentences. Governor Lucian Valen stood at the balcony of the citadel spire, the air biting his lungs with the Thames of Prometheum. Below him, flames devoured the lower districts. Hablocks that once housed thousands were now little more than glowing skeletons, their metal frames shrieking as they collapsed. The fires weren't random. They were sanctioned. His own seal authorized them, purification rites ordered by the ecclesiarchy and enforced by Arbit's fire teams. Valen had signed the decrees himself, watched as clerics anointed the ignition switches with sacred oils, their lips moving in prayer as if mercy could be found in the act of destruction. He could still hear the echo of the last sermon. A cardinal from the upper spire had declared, "Let flame cleanse where faith has faltered." The words had drawn cheers from the priests and silence from everyone else. Now, in the firelight, those same words clung to Valen's mind like chains. He had believed, once deeply, completely. His youth had been spent in devotion, memorizing the catechisms of the God-Emperor, believing every syllable. But belief was easier before the weight of command, before he had to turn faith into policy. Down below, a procession of priests moved through the haze, their robes trailing soot. One carried a censer so large it took 2 acolytes to swing it. The thick incense rolled through the streets, choking and sweet, masking the stench of charred flesh. The priests chanted as they passed, slow, rhythmic, almost hypnotic, and behind them, a squad of Arbites dragged a dozen civilians in chains. Their crime was unclear. Perhaps a whispered doubt, a missing ration, or being in the wrong place when the prayers began. The crowd didn't resist. They simply knelt, eyes glassy, lips moving in automatic devotion. Valen watched one of the priests pause before the burning remains of a habla. He raised his staff high and began to bless the flames, invoking the Emperor's mercy upon the cleansed. For a moment the sight transfixed Valen, the image so strange, so solemn, it almost looked holy. But then, as the firelight caught the priest's face, Valen saw the sweat, the trembling lips, the fear. Not conviction, fear. The priest's hand shook as he made the sign of the Aquila, as though even he doubted the sanctity of his act. That was the moment it began, the fracture. A thought, uninvited, crawling from the edge of reason. What if we are burning the faithful to prove our faith? The question struck like a blasphemy, yet it refused to fade. Valen felt it spreading through him, a thin crack running through the marble of his soul. He tried to bury it beneath duty, to drown it in ritual, but it persisted. What if this devotion, all of it, was not proof of loyalty, but a confession of fear? The firelight shifted, throwing his reflection across the window pane. For an instant, he barely recognized the man staring back. The ceremonial armor, the gold-threaded cloak, the sigils of Terra, all meant to symbolize purity and power. Yet behind the symbols, his face looked hollow, almost haunted. His eyes followed the rising smoke, wondering if it still carried prayers skyward, or if it vanished into the void before reaching anything divine. The vox grill beside him crackled to life. The voice of Cardinal Thalius rasped through the static, thick with righteous fury. Governor Valen, the priest declared, faith is the only bulwark against chaos. There must be no hesitation. The Emperor's gaze is upon us. Valen closed his eyes. The Emperor's gaze, the phrase was supposed to bring comfort, yet it now felt like accusation. Was he truly watching? And if he was, what did he see? The flames below, the screams of his people, the endless cycle of obedience and death. Or perhaps nothing at all. Perhaps the God-Emperor's light had long since dimmed, and all they worshipped now was its fading afterglow. Outside, a gust of ash swept across the balcony, coating Valen's hands in grey. He rubbed his fingers together, feeling the grit of the dead between them. The city continued to burn, the hymns continued to drone, and somewhere deep in the another spark, unseen, human and angry, began to stir. The first ember of rebellion. The chanting never truly stopped in the cathedral manufactorum. It echoed through every iron arch and gilded corridor, a symphony of devotion and dread. The ecclesiastical conclave sat in a circle of smoke and candlelight, a congregation of men and women who spoke in the tongue of the divine but thought in the language of control. Their robes, layered in white and crimson, brushed the oil-slicked floor as they murmured litanies over data slates and relics, their voices merging with the low thrum of the cathedral's machinery. Server skulls floated above the gathering, their mechanical eyes recording every utterance. The scent of burning incense mixed with ozone and metal polish, a holy perfume masking the rot beneath. Governor Marius Valen sat at the head of the table, his hands clasped tightly around a golden stylus. His eyes followed the movements of the ecclesiastical high preacher, Father Darnath, whose booming voice filled the sanctum. Purity, Darnath declared, his tones splitting the silence like a lozbolt. Purity through sacrifice, purity through fire, purity through extermination. The word hung there, resonant, final. The other clergy nodded in solemn rhythm, their approval mechanical, practiced. A commissar to Valen's left murmured something about lower hive heresies, prayer circles turning into protests. workers refusing to kneel before the imperial creed. The room shifted like a single living organism, turning its collective gaze toward the governor. Valen nodded, but his throat felt dry. He could almost taste the ash in the air. The papers laid before him were heavy with accusation. Names, lists, sectors. Thousands marked for cleansing. He had signed hundreds before, but now each name looked different. Each one felt like a blade against his conscience. Still, he dipped the stylus into the ink and pressed it down. His signature flowed, the imperial aquila stamped in wax beside it, a red emblem sealing another fate. The air around him seemed to thicken with every mark he made, as if the cathedral itself disapproved of his obedience. Outside the chamber's marble doors, the echoes of bootsteps reverberated through the halls. The Adeptus Arbites were on the move, black-armored enforcers dragging the condemned through the incense-choked corridors. Through the vox grills, the cries of the faithful bled into prayer chants. For the Emperor, they screamed, even as the shock mauls descended. The walls trembled with the violence of devotion. Valen's pen slipped once, smearing a name into oblivion. No one noticed. The choir of zeal drowned everything else. As the final decree was sealed, Father Darnath turned to Valen. "Your hand shakes." "My son," he said softly, eyes narrowing behind his gilded mask. "Does the Emperor not steady it?" Valen forced a nod. "He does," he lied. The high preacher smiled, that thin priestly smile that hid both judgment and pleasure, and resumed his sermon. The conclave joined in, their voices rising in crescendo, repeating his words like binary chant. It sounded less like worship and more like programming. Valen's heart thudded. Somewhere in the mechanical hum of the cathedral, something shifted. A chime broke through the ritual, sharp, distorted, every head turned toward the vox unit, built into the obsidian wall. The signal was not scheduled. The server skulls froze mid-air as the machine's voice crackled through static. Transmission intercepted. Source: internal ecclesiarchal archives. Content: heretical correspondence concerning Governor Valen. The sentence cut short, as if throttled. For a moment, no one moved. Then the preacher gestured, and the sound of robes and servo motors filled the silence again. Valen's mind reeled. Internal archives. That meant someone within the conclave. Someone here. A murmur ran through the gathering, suspicion, cold and sharp. Father Darnath's gaze lingered on him longer than it should have. Curious, he murmured, that heresy speaks from within holiness. Valen tried to form a response, but his tongue felt heavy. A chill crawled down his spine. The governor realized that the ritual purges were no longer about control of the hives. They had become a test of his own purity. The conclave was turning inward. The beast, once unleashed upon the masses, now circled its masters. One by one, the lights dimmed. Incense thickened. The machine, hymn resumed, but its rhythm had changed, slower, deliberate, almost predatory. Valen stared into the dark faces of the ecclesiarchy and saw no humanity, only machinery wrapped in flesh. He wondered if faith had ever truly been their purpose, or if it had always been a mechanism, a perfect system of obedience built to devour itself. When the session finally adjourned, Valen rose, trembling. His signature still burned in the wax of the execution orders. He could hear the screams of the lower hives echoing faintly through the cathedral walls, like the planet itself was protesting. And yet, above it all, he heard another sound, faint, almost imperceptible, a second transmission still whispering through the vox. Governor Valen, it hissed. Distorted and low, they are watching you now. He froze. Night did not arrive gently. It came like a decree, sealing the city in shadow and flame. The cathedral manufactorum was no longer a sanctuary, but a pyre. Its once gilded spires wreathed in black smoke that bled into the heavens. Promethium burned in the streets, carried by the faithful who believed that fire could cleanse sin. Their voices rose in hymns that cracked and broke beneath the weight of screams. The smell was unbearable, incense and burning flesh. Devotion and decay, intertwined until it was impossible to tell where prayer ended and punishment began. Governor Marius Valen moved through the corridors of his palace like a ghost, the sound of his boots drowned by the faraway wail of sirens. The air tasted of ash and metal. Every breath scraped his throat raw. He had given the order to contain the riots, but containment had long since turned to annihilation. The Astra Militarum battalions he trusted now fired upon the lower hive with indiscriminate precision. Civilians, cultists, soldiers, all rendered equal under the Emperor's mercy. Through the fractured stained-glass windows, Valen could see the holy fire spreading in great, slow arcs, consuming the manufactorums one by one. The city was dying, and it was dying faithfully. Inside his private chapel, the governor fell to his knees. Melted wax from the votive candles pooled across the marble like coagulated blood, glistening in the dim light. The cracked statue of the emperor loomed above him, its face half eroded by time, eyes lost to shadow. Valen's voice trembled as he whispered his prayer. I have served, my lord. I have obeyed. Why then does your light abandon us? His words fell into the silence, devoured by the static that hummed from the old vox grill embedded in the wall. It crackled faintly, a dying machine gasping for signal, and then fell quiet again. The silence became a verdict. He pressed his forehead to the cold floor, but faith no longer brought comfort. Only questions. He thought of the executions, the purges, the conclaves, zealotry, the endless cycle of cleansing that had become indistinguishable from madness. Was this what purity meant? He wondered. Or had they mistaken the emperor's will for their own hunger to control? The candles flickered as if in answer, casting the chapel in waves of trembling light. A low rumble shook the floor. The governor looked up. Through the narrow chapel window, he saw the outer walls of the hive collapse under heavy bombardment. Artillery flashes painted the horizon in colors of apocalypse, gold, red, and bone white. The Vox unit burst to life again, voice breaking through static. Southern manufactorums, seized by insurgents. Loyalist overwhelmed. Faithless uprising. Spreading, the voice disintegrated into noise. Valen felt something fracture inside him. He rose slowly, his knees stiff, his heart heavier than the gold-threaded robes that marked his rank. His personal guard stood outside the chapel, helmets off, faces pale and uncertain. When he ordered them to regroup the defense lines, no one moved. They looked at him, not with defiance, but with the weary eyes of men who had lost the reason to obey. One of them, a young lieutenant with soot on his cheek, finally spoke. Governor, who do we fight for now? The question landed like a blade. Valen turned away. His reflection shimmered faintly on the brass altar. A tired man trapped between sanctity and slaughter. For the Emperor, he said, but his voice faltered halfway through. The words, once thunderous, felt empty. He could not bring himself to repeat them. A tremor rippled through the floor again, stronger this time. Somewhere deep within the manufacturing district, A reactor had gone critical. The shockwave rolled across the hive, shattering stained glass and toppling the last standing icons of devotion. The sky outside turned white for a heartbeat, then black again. Valen stumbled back toward the cracked statue, his gaze drawn upward through the shattered ceiling to the night sky, a void veined with fire and ash. And there, faint and distant, through the smog and ruin, he glimpsed the Astronomicon, the Emperor's psychic beacon, still burning above Terra's distant horizon, a single steady light piercing eternity. He fell to his knees once more, not to pray, but to weep, because now he understood. The Imperium had never been held together by faith, only by the fear of losing it. And now that fear had become its own god. The Vox grill hissed again. A final message crackled through, southern manufactrums. Lost, insurgents proclaiming a new dawn. Rebellion spreading across the hive sectors. Then silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Governor Valen lifted his head toward the flickering light. The air shimmered with heat, the chapel walls trembling as explosions echoed in the distance. He whispered the only prayer left that still felt human. Forgive us. If you ever truly listened, outside, the holy city burned. Faith itself was devoured by the very flames it once sanctified. The bombardment had ended hours ago, but the heavens still bled light. The sky was a sheet of molten glass, streaked with ash and flame where orbital strikes had carved deep wounds into the world's crust. The air itself shimmered with heat and radiation, thick enough to taste, metallic, acrid, alive with invisible poison. Governor Marius Valen walked among the wreckage barefoot, his once ornate boots melted away somewhere amid the chaos. The marble floors of his palace had been shattered into razored fragments. The imperial aquila that once adorned the grand hall now split clean down the middle. Only silence remained, broken by the faint hum of dying power lines and the occasional groan of collapsing stone. Every step echoed like a prayer spoken too late. He passed the remains of his throne, a twisted, blackened frame surrounded by heaps of ash that had once been courtiers, scribes, and guards. The Vox grills embedded in the walls sputtered and hissed with half-formed prayers. Ave Imperator, Sanctum Gloria, deliver us from, before fading into static. The Emperor's name hung in the air like a memory of order, but there was no answer. There never had been. Outside, the city was unrecognizable. Hab spires reduced to skeletal towers, manufactrums melted into slag, entire hive districts turned into smoking craters. The bombardment had spared nothing, not even the ecclesiastical cathedrals, their spires bent like candles in the heat. The sky pulsed faintly, still aglow with orbital fire, and the wind carried the scent of ozone and charred flesh. Across the ruins, scattered survivors crawled through debris in silence. Some wept. Others simply stared upward, eyes wide and glassy, waiting for a sign that would never come. Valen stopped beside a fallen servitor, its flesh fused to its augmetics. The machine still whispering fragments of the litany of endurance through a ruined voximeter. The sound was warped, almost tender. He knelt beside it, watching the dying spark flicker behind its mechanical eye. You kept praying, he murmured, even when the sky fell. His voice cracked, not from grief, but from the exhaustion of disbelief. The servitor's final breath was a hiss of steam, and then nothing. Rumors had already begun to circulate among the remnants of the Astra Militarum. Company's half-mad whispers carried through the smoke. Some claimed they had seen a golden light descend from the heavens before the bombardment ceased. Others said they heard a voice that spoke in the emperor's tone, commanding them to endure. Valen heard these tales and said nothing. Perhaps it was radiation, fever. Perhaps it was desperation given form. Yet part of him wondered if faith, even now, refused to die. He wandered through the remains of the chapel, now open to the poisoned air. The statue of the emperor that once towered above the altar lay in ruin, its head shattered, its arm outstretched as if still reaching for salvation it could no longer grant. The governor sat among the debris, his hands trembling as he traced the cracks in the marble. For the first time, he did not pray. He listened. The wind moved through the corridors like a living thing, carrying with it whispers, or perhaps the remnants of vox signals scattered across the void. It was impossible to tell. Then, for a fleeting instant, something deeper stirred beneath the silence. A low vibration, so faint it might have been the echo of memory. His name, Valen. He froze. The voice, if it was a voice, was neither mechanical nor human. It felt vast, as if the air itself had remembered him. He looked skyward, to where the Astronomican's faint glow was barely visible through the ash clouds. Once, that light had been a beacon for the Imperium, guiding ships through the warp. Now it flickered weakly, like the last heartbeat of a dying god. Was it truly there? Or had the radiation begun to erode his mind as it had everything else? He could not tell. The line between revelation and hallucination had become thin as dust. Yet in that uncertainty, he felt something, not warmth, not forgiveness, but presence immense, cold, and undeniable. He stood in the ruins of his chapel, the wind whipping at his torn robes, ash clinging to his skin. The world had ended, and still the Emperor's shadow remained, not as light, but as the absence of it. Perhaps this was faith's truest form, not hope, but endurance beneath a God who never speaks. Somewhere in the distance, a lone bell began to ring, its tone fractured but steady. Each toll echoed across the wasteland like a heartbeat, hollow yet persistent. Valen looked toward the sound, and for the first time since the fires began, he smiled faintly, bitterly. The heavens were silent. But silence, he realized, was also an answer. The dreams began as whispers, faint, formless, drifting through the haze of radiation and fever that clouded the governor's mind. At first, he mistook them for the lingering pulse of distant vox signals, the static murmur of dying machinery. But soon the whispers took shape, coalescing into words that no human tongue had spoken in 10,000 years. He saw them in flashes of gold across the darkness, a cathedral suspended among the stars. Its spires endless, its light so pure it burned to behold. Beneath that sacred radiance stood a figure upon a throne of living fire. Not a man, not quite a god. Something between. The governor reached out, calling the name every imperial soul was born knowing emperor, and felt his voice dissolve before it reached the figure's gaze. When he awoke, the world around him was still aflame, the air thick with the metallic scent of promethium and blood. His quarters had become a shrine of madness. Lines of scripture covered the walls, carved with shaking hands into blackened plaster. Words that glowed faintly in the half-light of dawn. He traced them, lips trembling as he read phrases he didn't remember writing. The flesh must burn so the soul may rise. He dreams, and the galaxy endures. Each word was seared into the surface as though written by heat itself. The survivors began to find him there. At first it was the guards, gaunt, hollow-eyed remnants of the once proud planetary defense forces. Then came the refugees, drawn by rumor and desperation. They called him blessed, the one who still heard the Emperor's voice when all others had fallen silent. They knelt before him in the rubble, clutching their rosaries of twisted wire, praying for meaning amid the ruin. Their faith was not hope, it was survival given shape. The governor tried to deny them. He told them there was no miracle, no message, no divine plan, that the Emperor had not spoken, not to him, not to anyone, in over 10 millennia. But as he looked into their eyes, he saw what truth could not erase. They needed a voice, even a false one. They needed to believe the light above the clouds still cared whether they lived or died. So he said nothing more. He simply watched as they prayed to the words he had written in his sleep. Night returned, and with it, the visions. The cathedral of light rose again behind his eyelids, endless halls of molten gold, echoing with choirs of voices that were both mechanical and divine. He saw the golden throne, immense and infinite, its occupant unmoving, sustained by machines that hummed with the weight of 10,000 sacrifices a day. The Emperor's face was a blur of radiance, too vast to comprehend. Yet within that radiance, the governor saw something else, the faint tremor of exhaustion, the flicker of a dying star pretending to still burn. He awoke gasping, the taste of ash on his tongue. This time the words burned themselves not on the walls, but on his skin. Thin, red lines etched into his forearms. Scripture written in blood and fever. The survivors saw the marks and fell to their knees, weeping with reverence. They believed him touched by the divine, the Emperor's chosen messenger on a world forsaken by his light. They sang hymns to his suffering, their voices cracked and fevered, but the governor felt no holiness, only the cold realization that what they called faith was inertia, the endless turning of a machine too vast to stop, too terrified to question its purpose. The Imperium did not live by devotion. It survived by momentum. Billions prayed not because they believed, but because silence was unbearable. The Emperor did not speak because he did not need to. The galaxy moved because it must, grinding forward on the bones of its believers. As the days blurred into one another, the governor's dreams deepened into something like revelation. He saw the Astronomicon flicker, not as a light of salvation, but as a warning beacon, a fire meant only for those who could endure its flame. Humanity was never its purpose. They were the cinders that kept it burning. He felt it now, clearly, the truth beneath 10,000 years of prayer. The Emperor's light was never meant to guide them home. It was meant to keep them in orbit, to keep them useful. The revelation hollowed him. There, in the ruins of his palace, surrounded by the faithful, the governor felt his faith unravel, not in hatred, but in awe. He looked skyward, where the storm clouds parted just long enough to reveal the faint shimmer of the astro. The light reached him, pale and distant, and for the first time he understood its meaning. It was not love. It was gravity. Ash choked the air, coating the governor's tongue with the bitter tang of burnt promethium. The manufactorums of Varelia Prime, once a labyrinth of roaring furnaces and ceaseless industry, now stood silent, but for the rhythmic grinding of forgotten souls. Their augmetic limbs moved in eternal repetition, forging nothing, shaping air. Their vox grills emitted fragments of the litany of labor, corrupted by static and time, by sweat, by flame, by Emperor's claim. The words looped endlessly, hollow echoes of faith without understanding. The governor walked among them like a ghost through a graveyard that still breathed. The heat from the still glowing slag pits pressed against his skin, searing but comforting in its constancy. There was order in their madness. The machinery still obeyed, even if all reason for obedience had long since burned away. He stopped before a broken assembly line, where half-assembled lasguns lay beneath the dust. His reflection shimmered in the cracked visor of a deactivated skittery, its red optics dull, its frame eternally frozen mid-salute. Once he had commanded legions. Once his voice had filled the air with decrees carried through vox relays to every corner of this world. Now there was only silence, broken by the whispers of molten metal cooling in the distance. He ran a trembling hand over the skittery's armor, feeling the cold, lifeless machine beneath. The Martian symbols etched into its plating had outlived the man who bore them. Such endurance felt divine. The governor had stopped sleeping. Dreams had become indistinguishable from waking thought. Sometimes he still saw the cathedral of light from his visions, vast and unreachable, shimmering behind the veil of eternity. But its glow no longer frightened him. It merely observed, watching as the last breath of civilization faded into the smog, watching as the Imperium's great machinery ground itself into dust. He wondered if that was the Emperor's truest act of faith, not salvation, but observation, the willingness to watch humanity stumble forward, blind and burning, and yet never intervene. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of incense, the kind used by priests during the benediction of loss. He followed it through the ruins until he stood before what remained of the administratum hall. The great banners of the imperial Aquila hung in tatters, one wing torn, the other scorched black by fire. Yet even in ruin it stood. The metal frame caught the dying light of the sun, gleaming faintly against the soot. He knelt. His armor creaked as he lowered himself to the ground, ash rising around him like a shroud. For the first time in months, he prayed aloud, his voice cracked, raw from disuse. Emperor of mankind, I do not ask for deliverance, only for endurance. The words echoed, small against the endless ruins. He looked up at the Aquila, corroded, skeletal, yet defiant. If faith means believing when all else fails, then I believe. He smiled then, not with hope, but with the tired recognition of truth. Faith was not a promise of meaning. It was a refusal to end. It was the act of kneeling before the inevitable and saying still, I remain. A tremor rippled through the ground. Somewhere above, the faint hum of orbital engines could be heard, the fleets withdrawing, leaving this world to rot in peace. The governor raised his eyes to the sky, where the faint light of the Astronomicon glimmered like a dying ember through the clouds. It pulsed once, distant and steady, and he thought he heard the faintest whisper within its light, or perhaps it was only his mind fracturing under exhaustion. The Emperor does not speak, yet his silence was louder than any voice. He stayed there until the sun vanished entirely, and the manufactrums fell into perfect stillness. One by one, the servitors' chants ended, their internal power cores flickering out. The night grew heavy, filled only with the sound of cooling metal and the occasional distant collapse of steel. He bowed his head, whispering a final benediction. The Emperor endures. And as the stars emerged faint against the void, the light of the Astronomicon held unwavering, eternal. The governor exhaled, his breath turning to mist in the cooling air. His eyes closed, not in despair, but in understanding. The Imperium would survive, not because it should, but because it must. The fire would burn long after meaning was gone, in the silence that followed. The static of the void answered a whisper across the cosmos, faint and cold. Somewhere beyond, the Emperor still dreamed upon his golden throne, and in the shadow of his absence, mankind endured